Today's lesson in biological diversity, this is topic 6, the best selection. We'll be covering natural selection and artificial selection in this topic. All right, so the topic is called the best selection. So we talk about a domestic animal, basically a domestic animal. That's an animal that is no longer in the wild. It's been bred or tamed by humans for various functions, like if you look at dogs, maybe for hunting or maybe for protection, maybe for a good house pet, and so on. So artificial selection is used it's a technique in which humans are breeding plants or animals with desirable traits to develop plants or animals with specific traits. All right, so when we talk about artificial selection, it is also called selective breeding. And it's been used, this is like farmers have been doing this like for years and years, even before they knew about DNA and genetics. For example, farmers would breed dairy cows that would produce the most milk. Farmers would select the best beef cattle. Sheep were bred based on the quality of their wool or their meat. So farmers have been doing it for years and years. This is just why are there so many different kinds of dogs, different breeds of dogs, right? Right now they're all the same species, but there are so many different breeds of dogs, and they're bred for different traits and different characteristics. So there is this little activity here in the textbook, but there is this short video I'm going to play as well about the brief history of dogs. Next, we will look at artificial selection in agriculture. So wheat and barley, those were one of the first plants that were grown for food. Wheat and rice alone provide 40% of our food energy. So scientists use selective breeding or artificial selection to bring positive characteristics of two different varieties together. So for example, varieties that may produce higher quantities of flour that's also higher in protein. Wheat to have an improved quality when cooking and a pleasant yellow color. Wheat that is resistant to, for example, colder temperatures and early frost, and therefore farmers can grow it over a longer period of time. And having resistance to insects and diseases would also be a good characteristic to have as well. Why are there so many types of apples? This video goes into how artificial selection is used to make so many new kinds of apples. All right, so that video basically described what we've been talking about in artificial selection and selective breeding, but also the negative outcomes of selective breeding, which are, first of all, we're losing that genetic diversity and genetic variation, and also the problems that can occur if you are, or if scientists are breeding organisms that are too closely related together because of those recessive genes and diseases. Okay, so next, accounting for biological diversity. We've talked about natural selection a little bit, Charles Darwin and his theories of natural selection. We talked about the Galapagos Islands and his studies with all those animals there, like those finches we talked about. So here, one of his quotes here, "It is not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent, but the one most responsive to change." So the ones that are able to survive a change in environment, those are the individuals that are going to survive. Therefore, those are the ones that are going to reproduce and therefore carry on their genetic information. So in 1831, the HMS Beagle set sail to map South America. Charles Darwin explored and gathered specimens from a wide variety of habitats. The Galapagos Islands, which were off the west coast of South America, are linked to Darwin and his theory, and then Darwin published his most influential book, which was called Origin of Species by means of natural selection, and that was in 1859. Okay, so his theory of natural selection. So Darwin was investigating artificial selection because he could see what farmers were doing with breeding animals and plants and crops and so on. So he knew about artificial selection by speaking to farmers and breeders about breeding cattle, horses, and other domestic animals. So over time, he started thinking about natural selection and evolution. So natural selection, that's naturally occurring process in which only those organisms that have the best traits for survival in an environment will be able to survive to reproduce. And over time, this process will result in changes in the genetic characteristics of a species. So Darwin, he developed this theory of natural selection to explain how a process closely related to artificial selection was occurring in nature. There was another scientist, Alfred Wallace, around that same time as Darwin. He was also coming to those similar conclusions. So the Galapagos finches that we looked at before showed how the fittest or the most well-adapted organisms for a specific environment survived. So there's 4 points to the theory of natural selection. 1, all organisms produce more offspring than can possibly survive. 2, there is incredible variation within each species. 3, some of these variations increase the chances of an organism surviving to reproduce. And 4, over time, variations that are passed on lead to changes in the genetic characteristics of a species. This is an example of the peppered moth, just showing how humans how humans altered natural selection, basically. So birds are going to prey on moths that are easy to see. So light-colored peppered moths, they're hard to detect on tree trunks that are covered with white lichen. All right, so the lighter colored ones kind of camouflage in. The darker ones are going to get eaten by the birds because they're easier to see. But what happened is during the Industrial Revolution in England, the soot from industrial pollution started to cover the trees. So now the trees were covered with this darker soot. So the once rare dark colored moths became predominant, right? Because now they are able to camouflage and blend in, and now the birds can see the white moths, the lighter colored moths, and those are the ones that were getting eaten. Then the air became cleaner in the 1970s, and now the light-colored moths became more common again. So basically what happened here was that they were able to influence natural selection by causing changes to the environment. All right, I'm going to pause here and we'll watch this one.